Tim Black is a professor of sociology at the University of Hartford. He has focused a good deal of his academic career on a trio of Springfield men, three Puerto Rican brothers who grew up in the North End. He tells their story in his book, When a Heart Turns Rock Solid, and Professor Black spoke with us about his research and the dramatic story of the brothers' lives.
Ethnography means to immerse yourself in the lives of a community in order to understand that community. And so my work over the 18 years has been to immerse myself in the lives of a network of Puerto Rican men and women who I met when they were, the brothers in the story I met when they were teenagers, 15, 16, and 17 years of age. And they're now 42, 43, and 44. And so it's been immersing myself in their lives. What that means is living their lives with them, being part of their lives, and for them being part of my life over a period of 18 years, and learning from their experiences about not just their lives, but about what was going on in Springfield and in the country during that period of time, 1990 through 2008.
I guess I'm fascinated by a couple things here. How did it come to be you chose Springfield, and how did you get to these three brothers? You call them Fausto, Julio, and Sammy, not their real names, but in particular, how did this come to be here and these particular young men?
So I was a graduate student at the University of Massachusetts, and at the time I was studying school dropout in Springfield, and I had been invited into this space by the Private Industry Council at the time, and I was working with Mike Lewis, my mentor at the University of Massachusetts. And in the process of studying school dropout, one of the schools that I was in, or we were in, was in Commerce High School, and that's where I met Fausto. And Fausto was a very fascinating 16-year-old at the time, a good storyteller, engaging, articulate, interesting, and very quickly our relationship spilled out of the schools and into the community. We would spend a lot of time driving around Springfield and so on. But it was shortly after that that I realized, or I found out, that he couldn't read or write. He had not been properly educated. And it was that contradiction that this young man could be so engaging and so articulate and such a good storyteller and yet not be educated that really drew me in to his story, into his life. And that began the journey to find out, how did this happen? And in that process, of course, what I learned is that there were a lot of Faustos out there in the Puerto Rican community. And so I began to learn about the history of Puerto Ricans in Springfield, about segregation, about marginalization, and about how all that unfolded. And one of the newspaper articles that I came across at the time was the article by the profile Barbara Rivera, who of course you will remember as a prominent activist in the North End. And sitting before the State Commission on Hispanic Affairs in 1984, she warned them of a lost generation. And she was referring to this network of men and women who I became acquainted with shortly thereafter in 1990. In fact, the brothers and that family moved here in 1986 into Springfield, and coincidentally, so did I in 1986, of course, in different spaces in Springfield. And so that's where the journey really began, and I feel in many ways my book profiles the lives of this lost generation that Barbara Rivera warned us about.
You've called your work sociological storytelling. You're looking, if I understand it and interpret it correctly, to see how personal struggles, the brothers, their families, the people around them, is tied to concurrent public issues. Correct. That's pretty heavy-duty stuff.
Correct. That's really my method. And you're right, it is sociological storytelling, so it's telling about individual lives. But when I see individuals as a sociologist, I see their lives as sort of prisms through which to see larger social structures operating. So while this book is about the lives of this network of men and women that let me into their lives, it's also a story about the changes in the economy. It's a story about segregation of Puerto Rican, in Springfield, of the Puerto Rican community. It's about the drug trade in the streets. It's about prison. It's about drug treatment. It's about the types of jobs that were available and the ways in which those jobs were were negotiated by the men on the streets and so forth. So it's not just a story about their lives, it's a story about the social world.
There is certainly a growing, and throughout the time you were with these folks and now, a growing Latino middle class in this country, and upper class, increasingly divided, it seems, in many ways, from the poor, more troubled Latino or Puerto Rican population that you focused on in your work. Do you feel like, I'm reminded of the Walker Commission report back in the 1960s, that there were increasingly two Americas divided, a black and a white. I almost wonder if there's an increasingly divided brown America, if you will, Latino Americans, and everything it means to be Hispanic. So many different nationalities and groups. What do you see from your study?
Well, that's a very good question. And I mean, in many ways, the term Latino or Hispanic is almost a useless term, right? I mean, it's an umbrella term, and it includes so many different groups, many different ethnicities, and so many different cultures that when we use that umbrella term, it's not very meaningful. To understand the Puerto Rican experience is very different than understanding the Cuban experience or the Mexican experience, for instance, in the U.S. But the Puerto Rican experience is an important one because, of course, there are different experiences based upon class location is what you're referring to. And there is a growing Puerto Rican middle class. But there are still these intractable pockets of poverty that we need to focus on as well. And you're right, so there is this sort of division that occurs across class. But one of the things that I've noticed, and I think is important to point out, is that because of the experience of exclusion that all Puerto Ricans, that was part of that Puerto Rican migration experience and continues to be, to a large extent, part of the experience of many Puerto Ricans in the U.S., that there's a shared identity. And that while there are class differences, very often there is a sense of solidarity that can occur across those class lines. And I see it among the guys that I stay in touch with. While a number of these guys have moved into working class jobs and somewhat stable income situations, those who are sort of still on the streets or unemployed or precariously employed, while there are these divisions of class, they're transcended by their shared experiences. They still come together. These guys come together and for barbecues and for weekends and so on, irrespective of where they have ended up, what the outcomes have been for them individually, which is really fascinating to me. And I think it's really rooted in this history that I tell in the book, this history of this shared identity of exclusion.
Well, the book is When a Heart Turns Rock Solid. If you want to know Springfield today, you need to read this book. Professor Tim Black, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it.